TrueStory Vibes warmly welcomes all our beloved listeners. We're so glad to see you again in our familiar time slot.
Today,
TrueStory Vibes brings you a brand new story, one that we hope will touch your heart and stay with you. As you listen, feel free to leave a comment sharing the quote or moment that left the deepest impression on you. Wishing you a wonderful and meaningful listening experience. Madison Walker's alarm hadn't even sounded yet when a sharp rapping echoed through the hall. She bolted upright in bed, her heart pounding as she realized she'd overslept. The soft morning light filtering through the curtains told her it was well past 7. Beside her, little Sophie, her bright-eyed 3-year-old daughter, stirred under the covers. Madison flung back the blanket, steeling herself for what she already knew awaited on the other side of the door. "Madison," came the authoritative voice of her mother-in-law, Margaret Walker, from just beyond the bedroom door. "Get up. You can't sleep in on a Sunday." Sweat beaded on Madison's forehead as she hurriedly smoothed her hair and slipped into a pair of worn jeans and a simple tee. Each step toward the kitchen felt weighted by guilt. Guilt for being late, guilt for feeling exhausted, guilt for the impossible standards Margaret expected of her. When Madison opened the door, Margaret stood in her cardigan and loafers, arms crossed, eyes narrowing. "You know what day it is," she said icily. "Aunt Audrey and Uncle Ethan will be here any minute. They'll expect breakfast. And you promised pancakes." Madison swallowed. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a group message from Audrey. "On our way. Don't wait up." Audrey's carefree tone hit Madison like a slap. Audrey, her 28-year-old sister-in-law, had just finished a weekend styling gig downtown and loved to flaunt her freedom, knowing Madison would shoulder every chore. "Right," Madison murmured.
pancakes.
"I'll get right on it." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "You'd better." She turned on her heel, snapping her cardigan out like a banner. "Robert and I haven't eaten yet, and we need to be out by 9. Madison wished she could catch a moment's breath, but as she stepped into the bright, small kitchen, she hardly had time to think. First, she pulled out flour, eggs, and milk, ingredients Margaret insisted be organic, gluten-free, and farm-fresh. Then she glanced at the clock. 7:12. She needed to move. She cracked eggs into a mixing bowl, hands trembling slightly as Sophie appeared at her side, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Morning, Mama," Sophie said in a sleepy drawl, clutching her plush bunny. "Good morning, sweetheart," Madison cooed, bending down to kiss her daughter's forehead. Sophie's promise of unconditional love steadied her. She scooped Sophie onto a stool and tested the batter. The familiar swish of the whisk was oddly comforting. At 7:20, she flipped the first pancake. Just then, Audrey and Ethan swept through the front door, their designer tote bags bumping off the walls. Audrey wore skinny jeans and a perfectly tousled bob. Ethan carried a paper bag of pastries for the road. "Morning," they chirped in unison. Audrey peered into the skillet. "Pancakes, nice. I thought we'd grab coffee on the patio." Madison kept whisking. "They're almost ready. Would you like orange juice?" "Oh, yes, please." Margaret's voice came from behind, followed by Robert, her husband, who limped in with the slow gait of a retired physician. Madison hurried over to pour them each a glass. Sandra, her best friend and next-door neighbor, had once joked that Sundays were Madison's trial by fire. She'd wake earlier than Madison's alarm, blitz through chores, and still not be done when Audrey and Ethan were back in their cars, headed to brunch. At 7:30, plates piled high, Madison stacked pancakes tall, drizzling maple syrup. Sophie clapped her hands, her golden curls bobbing. Margaret sat primly at the head of the table, pursed lips softening as she tasted Madison's handiwork. Robert nodded, offering a rare word of praise. "Nice texture." Madison allowed herself a small smile, but inwardly braced. After breakfast, she'd be washing dishes, wiping crumbs from the counters, packing lunches for the week. And then, by the time Audrey and Ethan were deposited back at their condo, she'd still have to sew buttons back onto Robert's cardigan and sort laundry. She glanced at Sophie, spooning soft butter onto her mini pancake. Sophie giggled. In that moment, amid the chaos, the demands, the unspoken tension, Madison felt a surge of resolve. She would get through this morning. She would keep this family fed, this house running, at least for one more Sunday. As Audrey collected her phone from the counter to snap a breakfast selfie, Madison allowed herself to stand a little straighter. The echoes of Margaret's footsteps in the hallway reminded her that the day had only just begun, and she, Madison Walker, would meet every challenge, one pancake flip at a time. Margaret Walker watched Madison from the kitchen doorway, arms folded and expression unreadable, as if she were an inspector evaluating every move. The morning sunlight slanted through the window onto the dish-cluttered counter, illuminating the half-built lunch omelets and the batter left in the mixing bowl. Madison's fingers trembled slightly around the whisk as she peeled a slice of organic cheddar. "Those slices are too thick," Margaret said in her measured, critical tone. "A child that age can't manage to chew unless you thin them out." Madison paused and met her mother-in-law's gaze. The simple task of preparing Sophie's lunch felt under a microscope. "I'll cut them thinner," Madison replied evenly, dropping the cheese back onto the board. She steeled herself against the familiar sting, the implication that her normal, loving effort was inevitably inadequate. Margaret stepped into the cramped kitchen and brushed past. In my household growing up, we planned the week's meals every Sunday, down to the gram of cheese. It's called discipline, something you could stand to learn." Madison felt heat rise in her cheeks, but forced calm into her voice. "We did plan last night, as I mentioned. You suggested muffins, remember?" She turned, laid 2 perfectly even slices of cheddar into insulated compartments, and snapped the lid shut. Margaret sniffed. "Muffins are still better, but I suppose scrambled eggs will do." She leaned closer and sniffed the barely sealed container. "Too much pepper this time. Try to remember that children's palates are more delicate." Madison's jaw clenched, but she didn't reply. Instead, she moved on to wipe crumbs off the counter, scrubbing firmly at dried batter. The routine felt endless, each wipe a small act of defiance. From the living room, Sophie's laughter bubbled as she built a tower of plush blocks. Madison watched her daughter, only 3 but already so full of life, and her determination firmed. She swallowed away the lump of frustration and shifted focus to the next chore. Margaret crossed to the sink, slipped off her gloves, and touched the faucet handles. "The water temperature should be cooler," she said without turning, startling Madison. "Hot water ruins fine china." Madison nodded and adjusted the tap, then froze as Margaret vanished from sight. She felt the eyes of the entire household on her, even when no one was speaking. Every decision, every seasoning, every second she took to catch her breath was recorded and judged. She rinsed the plates and reached for the stack of dry glasses. Just then, her phone buzzed. Glancing down, she saw an email from her office, an urgent request to approve a campaign proposal by noon. The campaign had already consumed hours of her evenings at home, work she had willingly brought home to prove she could excel in her role and still manage family life. But emails from corporate headquarters were not welcome interruptions when you lived under Margaret's roof. Margaret reappeared, peering at the phone in Madison's hand. "You're checking work again?" "Really, Madison?" Madison cleared her throat. "It's only a quick look. I'll be done before Sophie's ride arrives." Margaret shook her head. Some lines must be drawn. Family first. She tapped the countertop with one fingernail, sending a small crack echoing through the sink basin. Aunt Audrey drifted in next, phone in hand, her voice light and teasing. "You need a break. Maddie, how about lunch on the patio today? I can treat." She lifted her phone to show a picture of an overstuffed avocado toast, another casual weekend treat Madison craved but rarely allowed herself. Madison managed a strained smile. "Thanks, but I have to finish the dishes and get Sophie ready." Audrey raised an eyebrow. "You're killing yourself here. I don't know how you do it." She swiped through Instagram. "I'd trade shoes anytime." Ethan, moments later, slipped off his loafers and sank into one of the cushioned chairs Margaret kept for guests. He closed his eyes and exhaled. "Margaret, could you bring me the remote?" I want to catch the morning news. Margaret paused. Fine, but don't let it distract you from your walk in 20 minutes. She swept into the living area and, with an air of authority, returned both remote and a folded newspaper. Madison took a deep breath and rinsed the last glass. The gentle hiss of rinse water was the only sound for a moment. She turned to stack the clean dishes near the drying rack and noticed the clock. 8:35. Sophie's ride would be here in 5 minutes. She hurried to assemble her daughter's backpack, placing 2 cheese omelets, a container of baby carrots, and a small carton of apple juice inside. Margaret, appearing once more in her loafers and pearls, watched with a neutral expression as Madison zipped the bag. Remember to send Sophie to preschool with a jacket, she said. Portland weather changes faster than you can say, PR director. Madison looked outside at the overcast sky and nodded. She bundled Sophie into a lightweight rain jacket, yanked on rain boots, and reached for the umbrella stand. She found Sophie's small yellow umbrella and flipped it open.
Got it, Madison said.
She glanced at Margaret, who stood by the door, gaze softening just a fraction as she watched Sophie. Sophie hopped to the door, clutching her bunny plush, eyes wide. The babysitter, a gentle neighbor named Linda, arrived and gave Sophie a quick kiss. Madison knelt to Sophie's level, clasped her shoulders, and said, "Have a great morning, honey. Be good for Miss Linda." Sophie beamed and ran off, leaving Madison alone in the hallway. She straightened her back, squared her shoulders, and felt the familiar surge of resolve. The scrutiny, the exacting standards, the subtle criticisms, she would meet them all. Behind her, Margaret set down a purse on the hall table and shifted her weight. "Don't forget to pick up Sophie at 3 and bring her straight here. I have a meeting at 4, but I'll be back by 5. Madison nodded. "I'll be here." As the front door closed on the babysitter and Sophie, the apartment fell silent once more, save for the distant hum of traffic beyond the window. Madison turned and surveyed the modest space under Margaret's roof, the spotless floors, the unblemished counters, the pristine sofa cushions that Madison straightened weekly. In her Texas home, life had been simpler. She'd raised Sophie as a single mother, juggling waitressing and night classes until she earned her communications degree. Now she wore the title regional PR director at a respected firm, but under this roof, she still felt measured by the neatness of her eggs and the thinness of her cheese slices. She walked back to the sink, filled it with hot water, and dropped the first dish in with a clang. As the suds foamed up, she allowed herself a private vow. She would prove her worth on her own terms. She would build a career that commanded respect and a home that nurtured Sophie without shrinking under endless critique. The shower of soapy water splashed against her fingers, and she closed her eyes. Outside, the sky darkened with rain clouds, promising another typical Portland afternoon. Inside, Madison Walker straightened her back, dipped the sponge into the water, and dove into a mountain of dishes with renewed determination. Under this roof, she would stand tall, no matter how thick the cheese or how delicate the child's palate. Madison was loading the last of the dishes into the drying rack when she heard the clatter of a plate dropping in the living room. She froze, sponge in hand, heart hammering. From beyond the hallway, raised voices carried the unmistakable tension of an argument. "I told you, Robert. You insisted on running those errands alone," Margaret's voice hissed. "Now look what's happened." Robert Walker's reply was labored, sluggish. Madison dropped the sponge, its soapy bubbles fizzing at her feet, and hurried into the hallway. She rounded the corner to see Robert clutching his chest, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. His hand trembled as he tried to steady himself against the wall.
"Dad,"
Madison cried, rushing to his side. Robert's face had gone ashen, his breath shallow. "Papa, what's wrong?" Margaret was at the other side, eyes wide, her customary composure shattered. "He said he can't breathe," she gasped. "Call 911.
"Now."
Madison's legs shook, but she found her phone, dialing emergency services. With practiced calm, she gave their address. An upscale townhouse on Cedar Lane in North Seattle. As she spoke, Robert sank to one knee, gasping. Margaret knelt beside him, voice shaking as she offered a trembling shoulder. Madison's eyes flicked between them, disbelief stinging. "Paramedics are on their way," she told Margaret, her own voice steadier than she felt. She grabbed a kitchen towel and pressed it to Robert's chest, following dispatcher instructions. Robert's hand, warm and damp, found Madison's, then slipped away as his eyes fluttered shut. Margaret stifled a sob. "Oh, Robert, please hold on." Minutes later, the shriek of sirens tore through the quiet Sunday afternoon. Paramedics rushed in, efficient and businesslike. They took over, checking Robert's vitals, securing an oxygen mask, and loading him onto a stretcher. Madison hovered at the edge of the doorway, watching the flurry of movement, the bright green of the EMT jackets, the white of the stretcher, the murmured reassurances. Through the blur, she saw Audrey and Ethan cross the threshold, Audrey with mascara streaked from worry, Ethan clutching a first aid kit. Audrey's gaze fixed on the stretcher. "What happened?" she breathed. Madison shook her head. "He collapsed. They said it's a heart attack." Ethan pressed a hand to his forehead. "Are they taking him to St. Vincent's?" Madison nodded, swallowing hard.
Yes.
"I'll come with you, Mom." Margaret's hands trembled as she closed the ambulance doors. "I'll ride with him," she whispered. "You should stay with Sophie." Madison looked at Audrey, whose lips tightened in determination. "I'll look after Sophie," Audrey said. "Go, we'll be fine." Madison climbed into the ambulance as the doors shut, the world closing in around her. Inside, Robert lay pale but conscious. Margaret held his hand, tears glistening. Madison squeezed Margaret's shoulder. "We're here," she said quietly. At St. Vincent's emergency department, they burst through the sliding doors. A triage nurse guided Margaret and Madison to the Trauma 1 elevator. 3 doctors in blue scrubs approached, talking in clipped tones. Dr. Ramirez touched Margaret's arm. "Mrs. Walker, your husband had an acute myocardial infarction. We've inserted a stent and stabilized him. He's critical, but we expect he'll pull through. You can wait in the family lounge." Margaret sank onto a vinyl sofa, exhaustion lining her face. Madison knelt beside her, arms wrapped around her. The tension between them melted, replaced by shared fear and relief. Outside in the waiting room, Madison's phone buzzed, an urgent PR campaign reminder. She silenced it. Nothing mattered more than Robert's life. She leaned her head on Margaret's shoulder. Together, they waited through the long, echoing minutes, bound by love and the sudden reminder that family was all that truly mattered. The fluorescent lights of St. Vincent's intensive care unit glared down on Madison Walker as she followed Nurse Patel through the sliding glass doors. The antiseptic scent of alcohol and bleach stung her nostrils, a stark contrast to the comforting aromas of her tiny kitchen at home. Margaret Walker's hand trembled in hers. For the first time, Madison saw her mother-in-law stripped of every trace of composure and criticism. Her shoulders bowed beneath the weight of fear. "Your husband is stable, but sedated," Nurse Patel said gently, adjusting the 4-line. "We've attached a cardiac monitor and ventilator. He's on a low-dose sedation to keep him comfortable." Margaret nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Madison swallowed, voice tight. "Can we see him?" The nurse stepped aside to reveal a single bed near the center of the ward, various machines beeping in unison. Robert lay reclined, eyes closed, chest rising and falling under the soft hiss of oxygen. His normally robust frame looked fragile beneath the thin hospital gown, an ECG printout trailing across the bedside table. Tubes and wires snaked from his arms and neck. Margaret moved forward first, her voice cracking as she whispered, "Robert, it's me." She reached out and brushed his cheek with trembling fingers. Madison watched as Margaret's stern features melted into a pleading softness. "Please wake up," she murmured. "We need you." Madison knelt beside Margaret, her own tears threatening as she placed one light kiss on Robert's hand. He did not stir, but the tension in Margaret's shoulders eased as though unburdened by some invisible weight. I'll stay with him," Margaret said, voice unsteady. You go check on Sophie? Madison hesitated, torn between wanting to remain and knowing Sophie needed stability. Margaret squeezed her hand. Go. Audrey's with her. Madison gave a wavering nod and slipped out into the hallway. The corridor's hush wrapped around her like a shroud. She found an empty seat near the nurse's station and sank down, phone in hand, heart pounding. Audrey's text. Sophie's fine. She asked about Grandpa's heart and says she loves him. You're welcome to say hi to her when you get home. Madison set the phone aside, taking a long, shuddering breath. Back in the ICU, Margaret had sunk onto a vinyl chair beside Robert's bed. Shoulders drooped, hair loose from its usual bun. She'd removed her pearls and cardigan, now in a simple blouse barely visible beneath the humming machines. The soft glow of the monitor reflected in her eyes as she slouched forward, exhaustion giving way to vulnerability. Madison took Margaret's place in the chair, gathering a clean blanket from the row of neatly folded linens on a mobile cart. She draped it over Margaret's knees and tucked it around her mother-in-law's ankles. Margaret blinked up, surprised. Thank you, she whispered. Madison squeezed her hand. We're in this together. Margaret's lips quivered. I was so harsh on you about your cooking, your work, your every move in this house. I never thought I'd see Robert like this. Her voice cracked.
I'm sorry.
I only thought I was protecting him. Our family. Madison's throat tightened. Mom, you were protecting what you thought was best. I understand that. She wiped a tear from Margaret's cheek. I know you love him. Margaret sank back into the chair, leaning against Madison's shoulder. For the first time, they simply sat, two women whose relationship had been defined by tension and unspoken expectations, now bonded by fear and the thought of loss. The steady beep of the monitor was a heartbeat they both cherished silently. Nurse Patel returned to check Robert's vitals. Heart rate is stable at 70, she reported softly. Blood pressure is holding. She glanced at Robert with professional compassion. He's doing well. Madison exhaled, relief and gratitude rushing through her. She glanced down at Margaret, whose eyes closed in exhaustion. Madison gently lowered her mother-in-law's head onto her own shoulder. Rest, she murmured. A ripple of movement along the corridor signaled the arrival of a rounding physician. Dr. Ramirez entered, soft steps, removing his cap as he approached the bedside. He consulted the chart, then looked up at Madison and Margaret. I have good news. Mr. Walker's cardiac enzymes have normalized and the stent is holding. He's responding well to our medications. We'll keep him sedated tonight for his comfort, but if all goes as planned, we can begin tapering the sedation in the morning. Margaret's voice trembled with gratitude. Thank you, doctor. Madison squeezed Robert's hand. The sterile room suddenly felt warm with promise. Dr. Ramirez nodded at them both. You did everything right. He's lucky to have you. He patted Madison on the shoulder. You should get some rest yourself. As Dr. Ramirez departed, Margaret exhaled a shaky laugh. Lucky to have me? Is that what he said? Madison laughed too. Thin but genuine. I think you earned it. They sat in companionable silence, shoulders touching, each drawing strength from the other. Outside the window, the late afternoon light softened over the hospital courtyard. Madison closed her eyes, leaning her head against Margaret's. For the first time in months, the constant undercurrent of tension that had defined their home vanished. They were no longer critic and foil, but simply mother-in-law and daughter-in-law united by love and fear. At 7 p.m., the nurse returned with 2 cups of lukewarm coffee from the bedside machine. Madison accepted one, warming her hands on the styrofoam. She glanced at Margaret, who took a sip and grimaced. It's terrible, Margaret said with a small smile. Madison grinned. Just like my cooking. Margaret placed her hand on Madison's. No, this coffee is bitter. But I've always loved your scrambled eggs. I mean it. Madison set her cup down and squeezed Margaret's hand. That means everything. Later that evening, Nurse Patel gently roused Robert. Madison and Margaret rose to their feet as Dr. Ramirez reappeared. We're going to lighten the sedation, he said. He'll wake up soon. Within minutes, Robert's eyes fluttered beneath his closed lids. A faint groan escaped him. Madison placed her hand on his arm.
Dad.
Robert's gaze drifted toward them, focus slow but certain. He blinked. Then his eyes locked on Margaret. Marg, he croaked. Margaret leaned close, tears streaming freely now. Yes, Robert, it's me. You're going to be okay. Robert's hand drifted upward, and Margaret gripped it, her voice thick. I love you. Robert turned his head, gazing at Madison. His eyes were steady. Maddie, he whispered. Madison swallowed, voice catching.
Papa.
He tried to sit up, coughs racking his body. Madison removed the mask and helped him inhale deeply. Easy, she said. Just breathe. He nodded, exhausted but alert. Thank you both. Margaret pressed her cheek to his. Madison brushed back his gray hair. In that moment, the hospital room, machines and monitors, bright lights and harsh smells, faded away. They were simply a family, reunited in a place no one ever wanted to be, yet grateful to be together. Long after the medical staff had left them to rest, Madison and Margaret remained by Robert's side. Margaret read from Robert's favorite book, her voice soft and gentle. Madison gently massaged Robert's hand, whispering words of encouragement. Robert leaned between them, closing his eyes as the two women, once divided by criticism and pride, became partners in care and proof that even the hardest hearts can soften when love and crisis collide. And as the night deepened, 3 generations of Walkers found peace in the steady rhythm of Robert's breathing, their own hearts finally aligned under the white glare of the ICU lights. Madison arrived home just as twilight settled over North Seattle. The Marquis Avenue townhouse stood quietly under street lamps, its pale blue siding softened by the evening glow. She stepped inside, the familiar scent of lavender air freshener and honeysuckle from Audrey's garden greeting her, and found the living room rearranged. A single vase of white lilies, Robert's favorite, rested on the coffee table between 2 neatly folded throw blankets. Audrey, curled up on the sofa, glanced up from her tablet. Heard the news? She asked softly, setting the device aside. Madison nodded, removing her raincoat. He's stable? Audrey smiled, relief incandescent in her tired eyes. Stable, responsive. Mom and I visited him an hour ago. He's already cracking one of his dry jokes. Madison crossed to the vase and inhaled the lily's sweet perfume. I'm so glad, she whispered. I've never been so scared. Audrey patted the sofa cushion beside her. Madison sat, folding her hands in her lap. You were amazing in the ICU, Audrey said. You and Mom, Team Walker in action. Madison shook her head, a wry smile tugging at her lips. Mom was amazing. She read to him for hours. I just held his hand. Audrey reached over and squeezed Madison's arm. Either one would have helped him heal. But enough about that. Mom's downstairs with Sophie, making dinner. Madison nodded and stood. I'm starving. She headed to the kitchen, footsteps echoing along the hardwood floor. The kitchen light revealed Margaret and Sophie at the table. Margaret stirred a pot of chicken noodle soup, her sleeves rolled up, her pearls long since removed. Sophie, in her favorite pink pajamas, stirred her own bowl of buttered noodles with intense concentration. Margaret looked up and gave Madison a radiant smile, a genuine, unguarded joy Madison had almost forgotten her mother-in-law was capable of. I wanted something warm after the scare, Margaret said, dishing soup into 2 bowls. She handed one to Madison and one to Sophie. How is Sophie holding up? Sophie bounced on her chair. Better. Grandma read me a story about rockets. She grinned and slurped a strand of noodle. Madison sank into a chair opposite Margaret, lifting the spoon to her lips. The broth was savory and comforting, and as she tasted it, she realized she hadn't enjoyed a meal in days. She swallowed, exhaling a contented sigh. This is perfect. Margaret reached across the table and covered Madison's hand with her own. I'm sorry I lost my temper so often. Her voice wavered. When I saw Robert in that hospital bed, I realized how little control I had over what truly matters. I was so focused on everything else. Madison brushed her thumb across Margaret's knuckles. We all do that sometimes. She glanced at Sophie, who was carefully transferring noodles from bowl to spoon. I'm sorry I never let you help more at home. I should have asked. Margaret shook her head. I had my own pride. I wanted to be strong for your father. She set her bowl down and looked Madison in the eyes. But I forgot that strength isn't refusing help, it's knowing when to accept it. Sophie looked up with big, curious eyes. Grandma, can I help with dishes? She piped. Margaret's eyes softened. Of course, sweetheart. She lifted Sophie down and guided her to the sink, handing her a damp cloth. Madison leaned back and watched as mother and daughter washed dishes side by side, Margaret teaching Sophie to rinse gently and dry carefully. In that light, Margaret's stern hands moved with tenderness. Madison sipped her soup, tears pricking her eyes as she realized how far they'd come. The same hands that had pointed out every flaw now guided a toddler's small fingers, patient and kind. Audrey reappeared with 2 glasses of lemonade on a small tray. She set one beside Madison and gave her a knowing look. You two make a good team. Madison smiled at her sister-in-law. Thanks. She sipped the lemonade, tangy, sweet, the perfect complement to the soup, and felt something inside her relax completely. Once dinner plates were cleared, Madison collected Sophie in her arms and carried her to the living room. Margaret followed, bustling with a renewed energy. She fetched a stack of photo albums from the sideboard and laid them on the coffee table. I thought we could look at family pictures,
Margaret said.
Remember when your family visited from Texas? Sophie was wearing that cowboy hat. She opened the album, showing a photograph of a sunburned 3-year-old Sophie commanding a miniature plastic horse. Madison perched beside Margaret, Sophie cradled in her lap, and browsed through the snapshots. Margaret pointed out a photo of Madison's childhood, a younger Margaret hugging a tiny vest pocket Madison at her 3rd birthday party. The memory made Madison laugh, a sound so light it surprised her. You loved my pink tutu, Madison recalled fondly. Margaret closed the album. I'll always love that tutu, she said softly. And I realize what truly matters is the love behind every messy breakfast, every argument, every imperfection. Madison felt tears slip down her cheeks. She reached forward, putting her hand on Margaret's shoulder. I love you, she whispered. Margaret blinked back tears. I love you too. Sophie tugged at Margaret's sleeve. Grandma, can we read another story? Margaret smiled, genuinely this time, and scooped Sophie onto her lap. Of course. She reached for a children's book on the coffee table, one Madison had left there earlier. Sophie snuggled in, opening the book with delight. As Margaret read aloud, the soft cadence of her voice weaving tales of forest animals and daring adventures, Madison sat on the floor, leaning against the coffee table. She closed her eyes and listened, letting the warmth of family wash over her. The day's fears, the relentless pressure, the endless striving, all melted away in that peaceful moment. When the final page turned, Sophie yawned and closed her eyes. Margaret tilted her head and brushed Sophie's hair. Time for bed, little one. Madison lifted Sophie and carried her upstairs, followed by Margaret. At Sophie's bedroom door, Madison bent to peck her daughter's forehead. Good night, sweetheart. Sophie mumbled. Good night, Mama.
Good night, Grandma.
Madison and Margaret exchanged a gentle glance. Back downstairs, they shared a lingering hug in the hallway. Madison rested her forehead against Margaret's. Thank you for tonight for everything. Margaret kissed the top of Madison's head. Thank you for being here. They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant city traffic.
Outside,
the street lamps cast pools of golden light on the pavement. Madison stepped back and smiled. I think peace really did come at last. Margaret nodded and took Madison's hand. Let's enjoy it together. Under the soft glow of the living room lamp, mother-in-law and daughter-in-law walked back toward the coffee table, ready to face tomorrow as a united family, stronger.
kinder, and at peace at last.
Madison Walker woke before sunrise the next morning with a gentle flutter in her belly, a tiny echo of the life growing within her. The memory of yesterday's peace still lingered, and she lay for a long moment in the quiet darkness, Sophie curled against her side. Beneath the soft hum of the bedside fan, Madison closed her eyes and placed a hand on her abdomen. She felt the faintest kick, as if the universe were affirming a miracle she'd only just realized. A second little Walker was on the way. By 6:30 a.m., she was in the kitchen, steam curling from a mug of tea in her hands, the walls still bathed in pre-dawn light. Margaret Walker appeared at the doorway before Madison could boil the kettle for coffee, an unusual early arrival. Margaret's normally precise hair was loose, a ribbon of gray and chestnut that caught the dawn's glow, and she wore a simple sweater over slacks instead of her usual pearls and blazer. "Morning," Margaret said quietly. Her smile was soft, unhurried. Madison blinked at her in surprise. "I made biscuits." On the counter sat a wicker basket lined with a blue gingham cloth, filled with flaky homemade biscuits that smelled of butter and country fields. Madison's eyes filled with tears. "You got up early?" Margaret nodded. "I thought you might need a good breakfast before heading into the office." She paused, then added, "And congratulations on your news." Madison's breath caught. She blinked away tears. Stepping closer. "Mom." Margaret reached out and clasped Madison's hand. "This family has loved you through everything. I want to help welcome this new little one, too." Madison's throat tightened. "I thank you." She reached for a biscuit, tearing off a warm chunk and savoring the soft crumb. Margaret poured her a cup of coffee. Again, just the way she liked it. Strong but smooth, and Madison felt a warmth so profound she thought her heart might overflow. At 7 a.m., Madison stuffed biscuits into her tote along with her planner, scanning her schedule. A site visit, 2 client meetings, and a board presentation by noon. She slid on a flowing maternity blouse beneath a snug blazer and straightened in the mirror. Margaret hovered nearby, adjusting Madison's collar as though she were dressing her own daughter. "Be careful with your back today," Margaret said softly. "Let me handle Sophie's drop-off." Madison shook her head, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "You're already doing enough." Margaret cut her off with a gentle smile. "Today, I want it." She moved to retrieve Sophie's backpack, bright yellow with dinosaurs stitched on the flap. Sophie bounded into the kitchen in her rain boots and pajamas, rubbing her eyes. When she saw the biscuits, she danced in place. "Grandma." Madison's eyes brimmed as she watched mother and daughter. "I'll see you by lunch," she told Margaret. "Thank you so much." Margaret placed a hand on Madison's shoulder. "You have an important day. Go show them what you can do." Madison hugged her mother-in-law tightly, then scooped Sophie into her arms. Sophie hugged back, burying her face in Madison's shoulder. Margaret loaded Sophie's lunch into her backpack, half a turkey sandwich, sliced apples, and a sweet note. "I love you, future big sister." Madison sniffled at the message, realizing today's surprise would reverberate through every corner of their lives. In the car, Margaret buckled Sophie into her child's seat, then handed Madison her tote of biscuits and coffee. "Go get em," she said. Madison leaned in and kissed Margaret's cheek. "I love you," she whispered. Margaret smiled. "I love you too, Maddie." Madison's day at the office hummed to life around her. The clack of keyboards, swivel chair wheels, excited chatter in the hallway. But she felt shielded by Margaret's morning blessing, a quiet confidence that steadied her through the busy hours. During her board presentation, Madison's voice was clear, her slides polished. She outlined a new digital campaign that leveraged local influencers, community events, and targeted social videos. Her colleagues nodded, impressed by her vision. When she concluded, the CEO offered a genuine smile. "Outstanding work, Madison. This will propel us into the next quarter with real momentum." Madison exhaled, her shoulders relaxing in triumph. She responded with a heart emoji and a promise. Be home soon. Back on the road, she carried that joy with her. The office downtown melted away as she climbed back into her car, biscuits safely stowed in the passenger seat. The sun was dipping low when she arrived curbside at Little Oaks Preschool. Margaret and Sophie stood by the front door, Margaret in a wide-brimmed hat, Sophie clutching the note about being a big sister. Sophie waved, then darted into her classroom with a grin. Margaret stood watching until Madison parked. "You two look mighty happy," Madison said, stepping out. Margaret removed her hat and brushed a lock of hair behind her ear. "It's a good day," she replied simply. Madison opened her door and leaned in. "Thank you for everything this morning," she said. Margaret smiled. No words needed. When Madison got home that evening, the house was alive with warmth. Margaret had unfurled the dining table to its full length and set it with cloth placemats, the first time Madison could recall crystal glasses and linen napkins in daily use. Soft light from a chandelier danced over steaming plates of roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and a colorful salad. On a sideboard, a freshly baked carrot cake bore the words, "Welcome, Baby Walker number 2. In piped icing. Madison stood in the doorway, stunned. She held her growing belly, tears springing to her eyes. Margaret turned from arranging silverware, her face radiant. "It's a celebration,"
she announced.
"Because this family has been through a lot, and tomorrow, we get to start a new chapter." Madison crossed the room and enveloped Margaret in a fierce hug. "This is so beautiful." She spun Margaret gently, bathed in the glow of candles. Sophie emerged from the living room in a tiny party hat, hugging Madison's legs. "Mama, is it time for cake?" Sophie asked, eyes wide. Madison knelt and stroked her daughter's hair. "Yes, baby. But first, we have an announcement." Sophie frowned in concentration as Madison cupped her belly. "Everyone, Sophie is going to be a big sister." Madison beamed, and Sophie's face transformed into pure delight. "I'm a big sister," she squealed, spinning in place. Margaret and Madison's laughter rang bright and clear through the dining room. Papers rustled as Audrey appeared, dressed casually but with a party hat poking out of her purse. "I heard there's cake," she said with mock seriousness, snapping photos on her phone. Ethan followed, juggling Sophie's discarded backpack and a bottle of non-alcoholic sparkling cider. They all gathered around the table, Robert reclining on the sofa with an extra cushion under his legs, still on oxygen but unmistakably present, cheering as Madison cut a perfect slice of carrot cake. Sophie proudly handed a piece to Robert, and he took it with trembling hands, his eyes bright with gratitude. Margaret raised a glass of sparkling cider. "To new beginnings," she said, her voice steady. Everyone echoed, "To new beginnings." Madison lifted her own glass and smiled at her mother-in-law. The years of tension, the scrambled eggs critiques, and the unspoken distance were gone, replaced by the warmth of shared love and hard-won trust. After dinner, they lounged in the living room. Madison reclined on the sofa, a pillow behind her back, while Sophie perched on her lap, nibbling at a biscuit. Margaret settled into her favorite armchair, Audrey beside her, Ethan sprawled on the floor with his phone. Madison closed her eyes, feeling Sophie's soft hair brush her cheek. She thought of the tiny life inside her, the promise of puppy-soft kicks and late-night lullabies. She looked at Margaret, reading to Sophie from a picture book, Margaret's voice gentle and rhythmic. She saw Ethan and Audrey planning Sophie's role as big sister, already imagining matching outfits and sibling photo shoots. She saw Robert, recovering with quiet strength, his hand on Sophie's head as she whispered in his ear. In that circle of family, Madison realized, she did not just have one blessing, she had two. Sophie, her bright first light, and the new life forming within her, a second sun about to brighten their family's sky. The worry of past months, the heart attack, the hospital nights, the self-doubt, faded into memory like a storm that had passed. All that mattered now was this love, radiating in every voice, every smile, every soft breath in the cozy living room. Madison smiled, lifted Sophie's hand to rest on her belly and whispered, "I love you, my two girls." Sophie pressed her cheek against Madison's stomach. "Love you, Mama," she murmured. Margaret reached out, covering Madison's hand with her own. "We love you all," she said. And as they sat together, family, heartened, hopeful, the future glowed with the promise of a double blessing that would carry them through every tomorrow. Madison Walker's Monday morning began with an email notification that made her heart stutter. A forwarded rumor from an anonymous sender alleging that Madison had been seen flirting intimately with a major client, Michael Reynolds, the CEO of a rival marketing firm. The message included a grainy photograph, two shadows near an office window after hours, their heads close together as if sharing a secret. She clicked through the tracking details. It had been sent to the entire executive team at Brightwave PR, including her immediate supervisor and, most painfully, her own department head, Karen Simmons. Madison stared at the screen, disbelief giving way to rising panic. This was sabotage, she knew it. She and Michael Reynolds had met only briefly at a networking event weeks ago. They'd never spoken privately, let alone shared anything more than a professional handshake. Yet here was an accusation, neatly packaged as internal intelligence, screeching across the company's Slack channels. By the time Madison stepped into the office, the rumor had already metastasized. Whispers trailed behind her at every turn, eyes flickered away when she approached the conference room. And her phone buzzed with messages from concerned colleagues. "Is it true? I saw the photo. What happened?" HR called a meeting for 2 p.m. about this. Ugh. Her stomach twisted as she made her way to her cubicle. Karen Simmons stood by the coffee machine, her sharp bob and tailored suit framing a face that now looked cold and appraising. Madison steeled herself and crossed the floor. "Karen," she said softly. Karen's expression was inscrutable. "Madison," she replied, voice clipped. She held up the forwarded email on her tablet. "Care to explain this?" Madison drew in a shaky breath. "It's false," she said firmly. "Michael and I have never been in the same building alone after hours. That photo is misleading, badly shot." Karen tapped the screen. "The executive team needs to know you're addressing it. We have a reputation to maintain. There's an emergency HR meeting at 2. Madison nodded. "I'll get you a statement." As she walked toward her desk, her fingers shook so badly she nearly dropped her laptop. She dialed her husband, Ethan, hoping to hear Audrey's calm voice in her ear, but only reached voicemail. She texted, "Please call Riley. Situation at work. I need support." Riley, her closest friend from college and now general counsel at Brightwave, responded within minutes. "On my way." Hang tai. Every passing hour felt like eternity. Madison drafted a clear, concise memo refuting the rumor, citing her event attendance records, security card swipes, and witness statements from the networking event staff. She attached the building's swipe card logs showing she left the premises at 8:15 p.m. That night, while Michael's own log showed he exited 10 minutes earlier on the opposite side of the building. By 1:45 p.m., she'd forwarded the statement to HR, Karen, and the CEO's office. Her palms were clammy, throat dry. She rehearsed her words for the meeting, bracing herself for an onslaught of skepticism. At 2 p.m., she stepped into the HR conference room, where 6 people sat in a semicircle: Karen Simmons, 2 HR managers, the CEO, Riley, and an empty chair reserved for an external investigator. Madison took the seat opposite them, heart hammering. "Thank you for joining," said HR Director Pilar Jenkins. "We have a serious allegation to address. An email circulated this morning suggesting an inappropriate relationship between Ms. Walker and Mr. Reynolds. Ms. Walker, would you like to speak to these claims?" Madison inhaled deeply.
Yes.
"The allegation is completely false. I regret that this photo was manipulated to cast a shadow. I have provided security logs proving I was nowhere near these offices at the time. I have never conducted any business, social event with Mr. Reynolds outside of the official networking event, which was attended by dozens of professionals and monitored by security cameras. I ask that this rumor be retracted immediately." Karen folded her arms. Your statement is appreciated, Madison. But we must consider the possibility of policy violations. Even the appearance of impropriety can damage our client relationships. Madison met Karen's gaze steadily. I understand. But I hired a digital forensics firm to confirm the image was doctored. I have the original video footage from the networking lounge. I can submit that as evidence. The CEO, Lydia Marshall, leaned forward. If you have proof, we'll review it. But we must protect our firm's integrity. Riley spoke quietly. I've reviewed Ms. Walker's logs, emails, and the original footage. It conclusively shows no private meeting. The forwarded photo was taken from a security camera angle that captured two colleagues, neither Madison nor Michael, in a separate corridor. He nodded to Madison. This is a deliberate attempt to derail Ms. Walker's reputation. A murmur rippled through the room. Pilar rubbed her chin. This constitutes harassment, possibly corporate espionage. We will investigate the source of the email. In the meantime, the rumor will be retracted in an all-staff memo by end of day. Madison felt the tension drain from her shoulders. She nodded, relief and anger mingling. Thank you. Karen's face softened fractionally. I'm sorry you had to go through this. Madison managed a small smile. Let's hope it ends here. After the meeting, Riley escorted Madison back to her office and shut the door. We got confirmation. This was intentionally malicious. There's digital fingerprints leading back to the email originating from one of Karen's direct reports, Lisa Chun in business development. Madison's eyes widened. Lisa was on her morning conference calls. Madison had always found her polite but distant. The idea that a coworker would plot such a smear was staggering. Riley continued. HR is interviewing Lisa now. If the claim is true, we'll handle it per policy, but rest assured, you're fully exonerated. Madison exhaled. I appreciate it, Riley. I can't believe someone would do this. You're not alone, he said. Take the rest of the afternoon off. We'll send the retraction. Get home and let family love you for what you are. An incredible mother, partner, and PR director. Madison nodded, overwhelmed. She shut her laptop, gathered her coat, and headed out, her legs unsteady. The halls felt emptier now. The tension lifted, but the sting of betrayal still prickling her skin. When she arrived home, dusk had deepened, and warm lights glowed through the windows. She found Margaret on the front step, leaning on her cane, watching the sunset. Audrey knelt beside Sophie, sorting through picture books by the porch light. Margaret spotted Madison and waved. Madison hurried to her side. What are you doing here? She asked, surprised. Margaret smiled. I thought you might need me, she said simply. Come sit. Madison and Margaret perched on the step, the air cool and fragrant with evening roses. Madison filled Margaret in on every detail, from the anonymous email to the boardroom showdown. As she spoke, tears threatened to spill. But Margaret wrapped her arm around Madison's shoulders, anchoring her. When you walked in there, I know you felt small again, Margaret said, her voice gentle. But you stood tall. You defended yourself without losing grace. She patted Madison's arm. That's who you are. Madison leaned into the embrace, letting the calm wash over her. Behind them, Audrey and Sophie joined, forming a quiet circle. Sophie climbed onto Madison's lap, hugging her mother's belly. Baby will be okay? She asked solemnly. Madison stroked Sophie's hair. Yes, sweetheart. Everything's okay. Audrey handed Madison a mug of hot chocolate. I got this from that cafe we like, she said, emphasizing we. Madison sipped the rich sweetness, savoring the solidarity. Let's go inside, Margaret suggested. Dinner's almost ready. They stepped through the front door into the cozy living room, where the table was set simply but lovingly. Margaret lifted a casserole lid to reveal her famous chicken pot pie, steam billowing in soft clouds. Madison felt a surge of gratitude. This was home. Safety, acceptance, love. As they sat down to eat, Madison looked around the table. Sophie chattering about her day, Audrey listening with rapt attention, Margaret sharing a gentle laugh. Madison realized the false rumors could break many things: reputation, trust, peace of mind, but they could never sever this bond. With each comforting bite of Margaret's pie, Madison felt stronger. The deceitful rumor had been the attack's blade, but honesty and family had turned it into a lesson in resilience. After dinner, the family gathered in the living room. Margaret picked up Sophie's favorite book about a courageous firefly. She began to read aloud as Sophie nestled under a blanket on Madison's lap. Audrey retrieved her guitar from the corner and strummed a gentle melody. Margaret's voice wove the story. Audrey's chords set the rhythm, and Madison closed her eyes, letting the music and words cradle her spirit. Outside, rain began to patter softly against the windows. Inside, they were safe, united. And though the echoes of deceit still lingered in Madison's mind, they were drowned out by the warmth of the home she'd fought so hard to build, and by the knowledge that, no matter what storms might come, her family would weather them together. Months slipped by in a gentle rhythm of growing anticipation. Madison Walker's second trimester was marked by morning stretches in the living room. Baby kicks so vivid, she could almost see them through her shirt, and the comforting hum of her family rallying around her. The cicadas that summer evening sang a soft chorus as she and Margaret sat on the back porch of the Cedar Lane townhouse, Sophie nestled between them on a plush outdoor cushion. Madison rubbed her belly and smiled at Sophie, now a confident big sister in her bright pink dress. "Do you feel the baby move?" Madison asked, placing Sophie's small hand where the flutters had stirred that morning. Sophie's eyes widened. "I feel it, Mama. It's like tiny butterflies." She giggled, jumping to her feet. "Butterflies in the belly," Margaret chuckled, brushing back a lock of Madison's hair. "That's right. There's a little sister or brother in there, ready to join the Walker adventures." Audrey leaned over the railing, stepping onto the deck in time to hear Sophie's exclamation. In one hand, she held an ice-cold lemonade, in the other her phone, ready to capture this moment of pure wonder. She snapped a candid photo as Sophie danced in her sandals, and Madison's heart swelled. There, in that warm twilight, the family's journey of obstacles and strength felt like a true testament to love's power to heal. Inside, dinner awaited. Margaret's famous stir-fry vegetables over jasmine rice, a hearty spinach salad, and soft rolls that still bore the warmth of the oven. Robert sat at the head of the table, now fully recovered and in good spirits. His hand nestled over Margaret's as she placed steaming bowls in front of each of them. Madison, Audrey, and Sophie sat in a row opposite, the new baby bump at Madison's right side. "Can someone pass the cilantro?" Robert asked, his eyes twinkling. Audrey handed it over. "It's almost a tradition now," she teased Madison. "Second baby on the way. Just like your first due date, but better because we all survived your promotion snafu, the summer storm, and that ridiculous office scandal." Laughter bubbled around the table. Madison felt gratitude ripple through her chest like sunlight on calm water. She raised her glass of sparkling cider. "To our family," she said. "To storms weathered and blessings multiplied." They clinked glasses and settled into a comfortable silence, forks moving in harmony. Sophie finished first and clambered onto Madison's lap. After hugs and kisses all around, Madison scooped Sophie up and carried her toward the living room, where an array of stuffed animals and picture books sprawled on the rug. That night, Madison lay in bed beside Ethan, her husband, with Margaret reading in her favorite armchair across the room. Sophie's soft breathing rose and fell from her sleep in the crib, the same crib Madison had often rocked as a newborn. Madison closed her eyes and placed a hand on her growing belly. Within days, they would meet the new member of their family. In the quiet, Ethan reached over and cradled Madison's hand. "Can you believe how far we've come?" he whispered. Madison exhaled contentedly. "I never would have guessed we'd be here, happy, whole, and expecting again." She smiled up at the ceiling. "Even when I was at my lowest, under that roof of endless critiques, I never gave up hope." Ethan brushed a kiss over her knuckles. "You're my hero." He paused, as if choosing his next words carefully. "Do you think Sophie will be a good big sister?" Madison turned and faced him, eyes shining. She already is. She's kind, protective, and wildly excited. She laughed softly, remembering the pride in Sophie's stance when she announced the new baby. I think she'll teach our other child so much. He smiled and settled beside her. I can't wait. A week before her due date, Madison began to feel the first steady tugs of labor. It was early morning, and the house was still. She woke, felt the rhythmic tightening, 4 minutes apart, lasting 40 seconds each. She nudged Ethan, who blinked awake and quickly assessed the situation. Time, he asked. She checked her phone. 4 minutes. We should call Margaret and Audrey. Within 30 minutes, the Walker living room buzzed with nervous energy. Margaret packed the hospital bag with methodical calm. Audrey applied a comforting lavender balm behind Madison's ears, and Ethan loaded the car, cradling Madison's hand between his own. Sophie, still in princess pajamas, looked wide-eyed in the doorway. Big sister duty, Madison said, kissing Sophie's forehead. Margaret scooped Sophie into her arms. We'll be back before you know it. The drive to St. Vincent's was a blur of streetlights and softly repeated encouragement from Ethan. Margaret hummed a hymn under her breath in the back seat beside Sophie. Though labor pains grew stronger, Madison felt an unshakable calm. Her family's love seemed to guide her onward. 30 minutes later, they were settled in a delivery suite. Madison gripped Ethan's hand through contractions and closed her eyes whenever the midwife, Clara, coached her. Push with the next breath, Madison. Ethan leaned close, voice steady. You're doing amazing. I love you. Margaret and Sophie watched from the small visitor's window, Sophie pressing her tiny hand against the glass, drawing hearts with her fingertip. Madison's heart fluttered with every contraction, recalling the journey that had brought her here, the lunches prepared by Margaret, the late-night solidarity after the scandal, the laughter around the dinner table. 2 hours later, a soft cry filled the room. Madison opened her eyes, tears streaming, as Clara placed a tiny, squirming newborn on her chest. It's a girl. Margaret's muffled cheer came through the door. Sophie's wide-eyed gasp drew a smile, even through Madison's tears. Ethan brushed a tear from Madison's cheek. She's perfect, he whispered. Madison looked down at the baby, swaddled in soft pink, her little fists curled. The flicker of tiny eyelashes and the quiet rhythm of her heartbeat felt like a lullaby. Madison's voice was thick with joy. Welcome to the Walker family. 3 days later, Madison and her newborn daughter, whom they named Lily, returned home. The house was adorned with pastel balloons, a banner that read, Welcome home, baby Lily, and an array of family gatherings. Margaret and Audrey bustled around, readying a celebratory brunch. Sophie greeted them in her big sister t-shirt. Promoted to big sister. In the living room, Erica, the neighbor who'd cared for Sophie those early days, snapped photos as Madison gently cradled Lily. Ethan carried in a fresh bouquet of daisies and placed them on the table next to the biscuits Margaret had prepared in a flash. Over pancakes and mimosas, laughter rang out. Sophie bounced in her booster seat, chattering about Lily's cute little toes. Margaret raised her glass. To our 2 blessings, Sophie and Lily. May they grow in love and strength. They toasted. A chorus of to Sophie, to Lily, to family echoing the room. Madison surveyed each face, Robert's kind smile, Audrey's proud eyes, Ethan's steady warmth, Margaret's beaming pride, Sophie's delighted squeals. Her heart felt as full as her home. The weeks that followed brought delightful chaos, Sophie helping to rock Lily's bassinet, Margaret teaching both girls lullabies. Ethan and Madison sharing late-night feedings and early-morning coffee runs. Audrey crafted a scrapbook filled with photos of Sophie's first meeting with Lily, Margaret's hospital vigil in the ICU. The joyous family brunch. At work, Madison returned part-time, supported by a caring team and HR's new Parents First policy. Riley checked in regularly. Karen Simmons offered a sincere apology for doubting her. The Lisa Chin scandal had been resolved with resignation and non-disclosure. Madison stepped into her office one morning. Lily cooing softly nearby in her car seat, and realized how seamlessly her family and career had woven together. On a crisp autumn weekend, the Walkers gathered in their backyard for a final celebration, a cozy bonfire beneath a canopy of leaves. Lanterns glowed, hot cider steamed in mason jars, and Sophie led Lily in an enthusiastic rendition of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Madison wrapped Lily in a soft blanket, Margaret draped an arm around Madison's shoulders, and Ethan stood behind them, gentle strength embodied. Margaret looked around at 3 generations shining in the firelight. We started this family one day at sunrise, under a roof of endless demands, she said softly. But we grew stronger, kinder, and finally learned that love is bigger than any test or trial. Madison leaned her head on Margaret's shoulder. The warmth of the fire, the comfort of family, and the promise of tomorrow filled her with quiet joy. Unwavering love had carried them through every storm. Now they sat, triumphant and at peace, ready to embrace the endless possibilities of their happily ever after. And that brings us to the end of today's story on TrueStory Vibes. Don't forget to leave a comment with a quote or moment that touched you the most. Your words give our team the motivation to keep creating more heartfelt stories. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again soon.